Hi everybody, today's video is a quick look at some basic rules, tips, strategies for behavior and behavioral management. I'm thinking particularly of toddlers, but a lot of these rules would apply to children of all ages. So I hope that this will be helpful to you. Remember, as always, this does not necessarily apply to your individual child, and I am primarily today speaking about children with typical development. There are, of course, much more complex strategies for children who have special needs, especially if they are having a lot of developmental issues and may have additional diagnoses. So this is a quick overview of some behavior basics for typically developed toddlers. For parents who may be a little bit frustrated, I hope I can be encouraging to you. It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, because a lot of the things you're struggling with are completely normal developmentally, but it's important that you do the right thing so your child stays on the right track, hopefully. So first of all, the biggest disclaimer of all is, remember guys, you are the parents. This is your God-given right. It is your authority to parent your child. There is a common misconception out there in our society these days that the children are raised somehow smart enough, they're just born this way, smart enough to raise themselves and don't need you to parent them. And that's not true. I see this all the time in the office in practice, because the parent, for example, may turn to the child and say, hey buddy, do you want to get your kindergarten shots today? That'll be 4 shots in the front of your thighs. Does that seem like a good idea for today for you, buddy? Of course the child says, no. Who wants to get shots in their legs? Nobody. Well, that's a good case of, it's really not up to the child to make that decision. You're their parent. You have to make good decisions for them. They're not capable or old enough or mature enough yet to understand how to make a good decision. So be their parent. You are supposed to be in charge. It's important that you are, and it's important that they know that you are. So another little quick thing. I read an article the other day, and it was funny. It was saying that sometimes millennials these days, when they're first hired onto a job, they don't want to do what their boss asks them to without a lengthy explanation. So maybe it's okay for us as parents to sometimes tell the children direct commands or orders without a lengthy explanation. You do not have to explain to a 3-year-old every single time why he can't play in the road. Yes, when you have time, explain it, but he needs to learn how to obey so that if it's an emergency situation, he obeys you when you say, come to me right now, because there could be an oncoming car and he doesn't see it. So don't feel like you always have to explain every single tiny little detail to your toddler. It's not necessary. They do need to understand that you're in charge, and then they have to obey. Okay, so that's the disclaimer, and then here come just a few quick tips. I'm going to try to keep this brief. Consistency is probably the #1 thing we talk about in the office all the time to parents who are having behavioral trouble with their toddlers. That means have rules. Enforce the rules. Let every caregiver who takes care of your child enforce the rules the same way. Sometimes it's hard when you're exhausted to even enforce the same rules yourself, because you have to get up and make them not do the thing you told them not to do, or make them do the thing you did tell them to do. So you have to be consistent with your rules. When you change your mind or change the rules, the child gets more confused and they're going to act out more and push back more and have more tantrums. So you have to pick your battles, because you have to enforce these rules and have careful limit setting. So once you pick your battles, then you have to enforce them. Don't stress about things that don't matter, like messy mealtime. That's okay. Pick the big things to have a battle about so you can be consistent with enforcing those limits. Let me give you a quick example about this. Okay, let's say, and we usually see temper tantrums starting around 12 months of age. Let's say your precious little 15-month-old toddler is now walking well, walked into the living room, found the remote control on the floor, picked it up, loved it, was switching all the channels, and I guess maybe she could eat the batteries. She just doesn't need a remote control. So you, the parent, take that little remote control out of her sweet little hands and you put it up where she can't reach it. Okay, the baby falls apart on the floor, kicking, screaming, head banging, flipping out, right? Well then maybe, for example, I'll throw grandma under the bus just this one time. Maybe the grandmother walks in the room and says, oh, honey, did you want that remote control? Well, by all means, let me get it for you, baby. And she gets that remote control and gives it to the baby. What lessons were learned in this little scenario? That baby learned that the rules you made are not enforced. They are very fluid. That baby learned that if I do this particular behavior, the tantruming behavior, it will be rewarded. That baby learned I am in charge. And those are all really very bad lessons to learn. So you see what I mean? Pick your battle. I don't care if they play with the remote, but if you decide you don't want them to, nobody needs to let them play with the remote. Grandma, dad, everybody needs to be on the same page as far as what the rules are and what the consequences will be. So let's touch on consequences. For a toddler, a typically recommended consequence is a timeout. And again, that's for a typically developed child. It depends. Our rule of thumb is 1 minute of timeout per year of life. We often did it in the kitchen and would set the timer on the microwave oven. The child needs to not be able to escape from this little area of timeout. You can use an old car seat. You can use an old high chair. You can use a kitchen chair and get a belt and put it around their waist. Anything that keeps them in that spot. And they need to stay in that spot till the timer dings and then they can get out. You can repeat timeouts as needed. But you don't want to pick too many battles to fight, right? Or you're going to lose your power. So pick the big battles, be consistent, stick with it. All caregivers, same page. That's probably the most important thing. The next one is don't give away your power. I see this all the time, both the mom to the dad or the dad to the mom. Let's say you've had a long day at home with the kids, they're misbehaving, you're frustrated and exhausted, and you say, you guys, you just wait till your daddy gets home. He's gonna make you behave. Well, what you just did in their mind was say, I'm not a legitimate authority to enforce any kind of rules on you, my own children, and that's a bad message to send. I've seen it both ways. The dads also, you wait till your mom gets home and she'll make you obey. That's just inappropriate. You're both equally parents of this child, so don't voluntarily give away your power. They need to know you're in charge of them, right? And oh, here's a huge one. I see this all the time. Don't reward bad behavior. And this sounds gross, but it's totally true. Think about those children as far as behavior goes, as if you were training a pet. So if you wanted to train your puppy not to do something, you might give them a little pop, you might squirt water. Don't do that to your children. But what I'm saying is, if you want your puppy to do something, give him a treat when he does a good thing. It's the same with children. So if you give them a treat for doing a bad thing, you're only reinforcing the bad behavior. Does that make sense? So let me give you an example of that. This has been a few years ago. I had a little around 4-year-old child who was typically developed, had no reason to be acting this way other than he was just very badly behaved. And he was just getting weighed before the visit and refused to stand on the scales. Now, a lot of tiny, like maybe 12-monthers are afraid to stand on the scales. But this was a 4-year-old child who knew that nothing was going to hurt to stand on the scales. He just didn't want to do it, and he was in a bad mood, and he just wouldn't do it. So I overheard the mom whisper to him, hey, buddy, if you'll get up on those scales, we're going to go get some donuts after this visit. Well, so far, that's not terrible parenting. I mean, this was a normal behavior. You don't have to reward normal expectation behavior. But whatever, I was okay with that. Well, then he proceeded to continue to flip out, kicked and screamed, hit the nurse. Finally, we got him dragged into the exam room. And when I went in to see him, literally kicked my glasses off, kicked me, screamed. It took like 2 people to be able to look into his ear for the ear exam. It was horrible, right? So after all this, I overheard in the hallway, the mom turned to the child and say, okay, darling, let's go get those donuts now. Whoa, whoa, whoa. No, 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 no. So that child learned that not only is it okay what I just did, and it wasn't okay, it was very inappropriate, but I'm going to get a reward anyway. So in that child's eyes, the mom has lost all credibility. She didn't follow through on you have to behave and then you get the reward. You get the reward anyway. So he's just going to keep repeating that behavior because there's no disincentive not to, right? So don't reward bad behaviors. Don't make false threats. I see this all the time. I have overheard parents say to children, hey, do you think you're going to go with us to Disney World next week on this already paid for, already scheduled vacation? Of course they're going to go with them to Disney World. They already have tickets to the park paid for. But they're trying to scare the child, I guess, into better behavior. But what happens is the child generally continues to misbehave because this has probably been a pattern for a while and they know it's a false threat. But then the child obviously goes to Disney World next week, right? So then they learn it doesn't matter what they say in threatening me, I'm going to get what I want. I've overheard parents say, do you think Santa Claus is going to bring you toys at Christmas? Things like this. It's inappropriate. When I would probably come the closest to this in my own personal parenting ways, I would keep threatening the children, do you want a spanking? And honestly, I think I heard my parents say that. That's a really foolish thing to say. No child wants a spanking. So don't talk about it. Don't threaten things that you're not actually going to do, because it just erodes your power and it's not effective parenting. So don't make false threats. Here are some things that I do want you to do. I do want you to enforce obedience. So my husband always says, children will do what you inspect, not what you expect. So if you tell them to go do their math homework, you have to check that they did their math homework. So you have to enforce obedience. If they threw something on the floor and they needed to throw it away and they refused to, like one of my toddlers once did, you have to pick them up and drag them over there, put it in their hand, drag them to the trash can, and make them throw it away. So you have to enforce obedience. Right? So there are some positive things too. This is not just a list of things not to do. I do want you to enforce obedience. I do want you to make expectations clear. So when children know what is expected of them, they're much more likely to cooperate and behave. Another part of behavior is many children are just acting out to get any kind of attention, positive or negative. And so it's important that you fill their little emotional cup every day, especially in this toddler age group I'm talking about. You may need to just sit down with them on your lap and read books. 15, 20, 30 minutes a day would be fantastic. And that quality time together shouldn't be screen time. In fact, if you're struggling with a sudden, much worsening behavioral problem, even in a toddler, it could be screen time related. It just provides such a different mental stimulation than reading books or snuggling or singing or playing outdoors, and it can cause pretty dramatic and noticeable behavioral changes. So be extremely careful about the amount of screen time your child's getting. Under the age of 2, remember, per the American Academy of Pediatrics, those kids need 0 screen time. Screen time under 2 is linked with higher rates of ADHD diagnoses by age 7. So please be careful about that. Be careful about what they're watching and seeing. Even with children around them, they can repeat behaviors that they've seen. So these are just some really quick, hopefully helpful tips for you parents of toddlers out there struggling with some behavioral issues. The reason it's extremely important is because if you don't tackle this now, they won't see you as a legitimate authority figure when they're teenagers, and it can be even more challenging at that point. Hope this helped. Thanks.